Mansfield Part 2.
After 2 days of travel, William and Fanny arrived in Portsmouth. Fanny's heart was beating loudly as the coach passed through the familiar streets of her childhood. As they got nearer the house where she had spent the first 10 years of her life, she found herself thinking about her family. It was more than 8 years since she had left them, and her younger brothers and sisters must have changed a great deal in that time. A sister, Betsy, had been born 5 years before, and another sister, Sarah, had become ill and died a few years after Fanny left home. But the Prices were Fanny's real family, and she desperately wanted to get to know them again. She wanted to love them and be loved by all of them. But she didn't know what her brothers and sisters felt about her. They probably didn't remember her very well, and were no longer interested in their sister. They might even be jealous of her because she had been living in a rich home for the last 8 years. She felt more confident about her mother. My mother's feelings won't have changed, she thought. It's natural for a mother to love her children. But then she thought sadly, I don't suppose it will make much difference to my father. He never seemed very interested in my sisters or me. She turned to her brother. Oh, William, I've been away for such a long time, and so many things have changed, she said. Sarah is dead, and I've never even met Betsy. I do hope our other brothers and sisters haven't forgotten me. Do you think they will love me and accept me as their sister? Dearest Fanny, answered her brother affectionately, of course they will love you. It may take a little time. That's only natural, but very soon they will learn to love you as I do. Mother certainly loves you, and I'm sure she has always loved you, even when you were far away. But you mustn't be surprised if she's too busy to spend a lot of time with you. She has a lot to do, and our servants aren't as efficient as the servants at Mansfield Park. Mother doesn't seem to manage them very well. At that moment, the coach reached the Prices' house, and Fanny's mother and 2 sisters came to the door to welcome them. Fanny saw that her sister Susan, who was now 14, had grown into an attractive young girl. She and little Betsy greeted Fanny politely, and they both seemed glad to see her. Her mother was clearly very happy to see her eldest daughter again, and put her arms lovingly around Fanny. Dearest Fanny, how you've grown, she said. You were just a little girl when you left, and now you're a young lady. Come inside, my dear. You must be tired after the long journey. We'll talk later when you've rested. Betsy, go and tell the servant to bring some tea for your sister. Fanny was so happy and excited to see her mother again that for a moment she was unable to say anything. But to Fanny's great surprise, her mother didn't wait for her to speak. She left Fanny standing in the hallway and hurried off to welcome William and give him a message from the captain of his ship. My dear William, she said, your ship will be ready to leave very soon, and you must join it at once. You're going to be away for many months. Oh dear, how will I get your things ready in time? While their mother was busy with William, Susan took Fanny into the living room. Fanny couldn't imagine that such a small space was a living room for a large family. Almost immediately, however, she realized her mistake and was ashamed. She hoped that no one suspected her thoughts. I must be careful, she thought. It's very wrong of me to compare my home here with my home at Mansfield Park. I must show Susan and the others that life at Mansfield Park hasn't spoiled me. It would be terrible if my own family thought that I was critical of them or their home. Susan couldn't help wondering what Fanny would think of their poor home after living in luxury at Mansfield Park. Perhaps she would think that her own family was inferior to the rich Bertrams. But Susan was a fair, sensible girl, and wanted to know her sister better before deciding whether she could like her or not. Chapter 11. Portsmouth. "You won't meet two of our brothers," said Susan. "They're both working far away from home now, but George, Charles, and Sam will soon be home for dinner. You'll probably hear them long before they reach the door." A few moments later, 3 noisy young boys ran into the room. Fanny had very affectionate memories of one of them, George, for she had often looked after him when he was a baby. But George was nearly 9 now, and he and his brothers ran all over the house, shouting and arguing. Fanny wasn't used to such noise, which was almost intolerable in the small house. She was tired after the journey and confused. Her brothers and sisters were like strangers, and even her mother didn't seem especially excited to see her. Fanny didn't think it would be any different with her father. She remembered him as a bad-tempered man who had paid very little attention to her or his other daughters. He worked long hours at the shipyard, and when he wasn't working, he was often out getting drunk. When Mr. Price came home, he welcomed Fanny briefly, but soon turned his attention to his 3 young sons. "Stop making that terrible noise," he shouted. "Can't a man get a bit of peace and quiet in his own home?" However, he quickly forgot about the younger boys when William came into the room. The 2 of them started talking with great enthusiasm about William's ship and life in the Navy. Mr. Price had always wanted his sons to be sailors, and he was especially pleased that William had become a lieutenant. "I'm proud of you, son," he said to William. "In our family, there has always been a tradition of being in the Navy, and you've done better than any of us. You're a lieutenant. I don't have many workmates at the shipyard who can say that about their sons." Fanny watched her father and the other members of the family. She saw that there were many things wrong in the Price home, which she had been too young to notice before. The house was disorganized, people didn't listen to each other, and the children were badly behaved. But the biggest changes, Fanny realized, were in herself. She had become used to a different way of life at Mansfield Park. Fanny immediately felt guilty for feeling this way. "Of course it's all much easier there, because there's plenty of money," she thought. "But I must be fair. It's hard for my mother to look after a big family with very little help and to teach the younger children how to behave at the same time." Fanny tried to find excuses, but the truth was that much of the situation was her mother's own fault. She was lazy by nature and a bad organizer. She had no idea how to control her servants or her children. Meals were badly cooked and served late. Clothes were not mended or ready for wearing when they were needed, and the boys paid very little attention to their mother's instructions. As for Betsy, her mother spoiled her youngest daughter and let her do whatever she wanted. "Isn't it strange how clearly you see some things when you're far away from them?" thought Fanny. "I appreciate Mansfield Park now even more than I did before. I miss my home and family there." There were many ways Fanny could have helped, but she didn't offer to do anything, as she was afraid her mother would think she was criticizing. Fanny often felt lonely and spent much of her time in the room she shared with Susan, reading books she borrowed from the public library. Fanny had hoped to find a loving family in Portsmouth, and she was very disappointed. The only person she felt close to was William, but he was gone now. He had had little time for Fanny in the last few hours before he left. He had been too busy trying to get ready for his departure. His mother had promised to shorten the sleeves of William's new uniform, but she had forgotten. Then it had to be done very quickly at the last minute. Everything was panic and disorder. After William had left, Fanny looked around her. "This house will never feel like home to me," she thought sadly. I don't feel like one of the family. No one needs me or wants my company. At Mansfield Park, my Aunt Bertram is always pleased when I spend time with her, and Edmund is always happy to talk to me. Chapter 12. The Sisters. Gradually, however, Fanny began to realize that there was one member of the family she might be of use to, her sister Susan. She watched her younger sister and was impressed by the efforts Susan made to improve the running of the household and to make the younger boys behave themselves. For a 14-year-old, Susan was very sensible. Fanny wanted very much to give her sister encouragement and support, but was afraid that Susan wouldn't welcome it. But she was hopeful that things would change. In some ways, Susan reminded Fanny of her dear William. Both William and Susan had an open, friendly personality, and Fanny felt that if she were patient, she and her sister might one day be friends. At first, Susan had been unhappy about having to share a room with Fanny. She thought that a sister who had lived for years in a wealthy home, like Mansfield Park, would be proud and superior, but in time she learned that Fanny wasn't proud at all, but was modest, kind, and considerate. She began to like her older sister more. One day, something happened which brought the two girls closer together. Fanny saw that Betsy was playing with a little silver knife, and that Susan seemed very upset by this. Soon Fanny understood why. "Betsy, give me that knife," Susan said. "You know it's one of my special possessions. It belonged to Sarah, and just before she died, she said she wanted me to have it." Susan turned to her mother for help. "Mother," she begged, "please tell Betsy to give me my knife." But her mother didn't take the matter very seriously. It was much easier to give in to Betsy than to listen to her screams when she didn't get what she wanted. "It's only a knife," she said. "Let your little sister play with it if she wants." Fanny was shocked. She and Susan had spoken several times of their sister, Sarah, and Fanny knew how upset Susan had been when Sarah became ill and died. The little knife was very precious to her. It horrified Fanny that their mother could be so insensitive to poor Susan's feelings. Suddenly it occurred to Fanny that there was a way she could help. "Betsy, would you like to have your own knife?" she asked. "Oh, yes, please, Fanny," cried Betsy. "I'd love that." Fanny had a little money that Sir Thomas had given her. She took some of it and bought a silver knife for the little girl. "Here you are, Betsy," she said, smiling at her little sister. "Now you have a knife, too." "Oh, thank you, Fanny," said Betsy. "Here, Susan, take your old knife. I don't want it any more." Susan was very grateful to Fanny. No one in the Price family had ever done anything so kind for her before, and it made her love her older sister very much. Now that the two girls were good friends, Susan was happy to learn all she could from her sister, and Fanny was delighted to teach her. Finally, she was able to be of some use to her family. The sisters spent many happy hours in their room talking to each other. Fanny taught Susan how to borrow books from the public library and suggested some that she might enjoy reading. Many of them were books she herself had read because Edmund had recommended them. Mansfield Park had its own private library with a very fine collection of books, and it was one of Fanny's favorite places. When she was reading, the hours always passed happily. She wanted Susan to discover the pleasures of reading, too. If Susan had good books to read, she wouldn't feel so lonely or unhappy when Fanny returned to Mansfield Park. "Oh, Fanny," Susan cried one day, "how will I manage without you? I'll miss you so much. I've never had such a good friend before. Will you write to me often and tell me what you're doing? And you must tell me everything that happens to the Bertram family. Now that you've told me so much about all of them, I feel that I know them myself." "Of course. answered Fanny with a warm smile. "I'm happy that we've become friends. And I'll miss you, too. We must write to each other often. But let's not be sad now. I'm not leaving yet. I'll be here in Portsmouth for another month." Fanny's friendship with her sister Susan made her stay at Portsmouth much more pleasant, but she still missed Mansfield Park and the Bertram family very much. Every day she waited anxiously for news from Mansfield Park. Edmund had promised to write to Fanny as often as he could, and she looked forward to his letters. For some time, they arrived regularly every 3 or 4 days, and brought her news of all the people she knew. She was surprised, however, to get letters from her Aunt Bertram, too, as her aunt rarely did anything that required an effort. "I believe my aunt really misses me," thought Fanny. "I'd no idea that she cared so much about me. I'll be happy to talk and read to her again when I return to Mansfield Park." But Fanny was now getting rather worried. In Edmund's last letter, he had written that he was going to London, and it was now more than a week since she had had a letter from him. Is it possible that he's seen Mary Crawford and is now too happy to write? She wondered. No, I don't think that's very likely. If something important had happened to Edmund, he would have written and told me about it. He always shares his news with me. As long as I don't get a letter, I can be sure that he has nothing special to tell me. Edmund had, in fact, seen Mary Crawford several times, but he found it difficult to write a long letter to Fanny from London. He preferred to wait till he returned to Mansfield Park and write to her from the peace of their home. Chapter 13. An Unwelcome Visitor. One day, when Fanny was about to go upstairs, she heard a knock at the front door. The servant went to open it, and Fanny heard a voice which she recognized immediately. It was Henry Crawford. Fanny was horrified. She had thought that in Portsmouth she would be safe from Henry's unwanted attentions. "Why can't he leave me alone?" she said to herself. "He has never met my family and has no reason to visit them, so he's come especially to see me. I don't want to speak to him, but I can't be impolite. What should I do?" Fanny was very nervous, but she managed to control her emotions and speak calmly. She told the servant to let Henry enter and took him into the living room. "This is Mr. Henry Crawford, the gentleman who helped William get his promotion to lieutenant," she said, introducing Henry to her mother. Mrs. Price wasn't used to meeting gentlemen like Henry. For a moment, she didn't know what to say, but he was a visitor in her home, and she quickly remembered her good manners. "How do you do, Mr. Crawford? I'm delighted to meet you. Please sit down and make yourself comfortable. We're so grateful for all your kindness to William. I'm sorry that my husband isn't at home at the moment. Have you had a tiring journey? Would you like some tea?" she said, hardly stopping for breath. Henry listened patiently and answered her questions politely. At first, he didn't try to include Fanny in the conversation, and she was very relieved. "It's kind of Henry to give all his attention to my mother. I believe he understands that I'm nervous and is giving me time to calm myself before he speaks to me," she said to herself. "He never used to be so thoughtful, but perhaps he has changed since we last met." Eventually, however, Fanny and Henry had to talk to each other. Her mother would have thought it very strange if Fanny hadn't spoken to her friend. Henry would have preferred to talk to Fanny alone, but he knew he must be patient. Fanny needed time to feel comfortable with him before he spoke to her of his feelings. He didn't want to frighten her. "How are you, Fanny?" he said politely. "You certainly look very well. It must be very pleasant for you to be with your family." "Yes, it is," said Fanny. She turned to Susan, who was sitting at the window, and said, "May I introduce my sister Susan to you?" "I'm very pleased to meet you," said Henry with a smile. He turned back to Mrs. Price and added, "Perhaps you would allow Fanny and Susan to walk with me and show me the town. I've never been to Portsmouth." Mrs. Price agreed, and Fanny didn't object to Henry's plan. With Susan beside her, there was no chance that Henry would try to have a private conversation with her. All Fanny had to do was be pleasant and friendly for an hour or two, and then Henry would leave them and go back to London. Suddenly, Fanny saw her father walking toward them. She couldn't avoid introducing Henry to Mr. Price and explaining who he was. Fanny waited in terror to hear her father speak, but she realized immediately that at least he wasn't drunk. She was surprised to hear how respectfully he spoke to Henry. After the two men had talked for a while, Mr. Price invited Henry to come and visit the shipyard where he worked. Henry didn't know what to do. He couldn't refuse the invitation, but he didn't want to miss an opportunity of talking to Fanny. He asked Mr. Price if the girls could come with them. Mr. Price agreed, but only because it was hard to say no to a gentleman like Henry. After that, he paid no more attention to Fanny and Susan, but walked in front of them talking to Henry Crawford. When they reached the shipyard, they were joined by some of Mr. Price's shipyard friends. Several of them had been his workmates for years. They nodded politely to Fanny, whom they didn't know, but they knew Susan, and talked to her in a friendly way. While Susan was talking to her father's friends, Henry was able to have a brief moment alone with Fanny. He told her that the only reason he had come to Portsmouth was to see her, but before she could think of anything to say, they were joined again by Susan. "I haven't been to the shipyard for a long time," she said. "I used to come with William to bring food or a message to Father. It's very pleasant to come here again." As they were walking home, Henry did everything he could to make Fanny think well of him. He gave her news of people they knew, and spoke warmly about Mansfield Park because he knew it would please her. "I was right," Fanny thought. "Henry really has improved. He seems to be a much nicer person now than he used to be." The girls said goodbye to Henry outside the Price's home. Henry hadn't said how long he was planning to be in Portsmouth, but Fanny didn't think he would stay much longer. He had come only to visit her, and although she had been polite, she hadn't given him any encouragement. She could think of no reason for him to delay his return to London. But Fanny was mistaken. "Fanny was surprised to see me, but I don't think I was unwelcome," Henry thought. "She just needs more time to feel comfortable with me. I must find a way to talk to her again." The next day was Sunday, and Henry guessed correctly that Mrs. Price and her daughters would go out for a walk. He waited patiently till he saw them leave the house and followed them for some time. Then he walked up to them as if he were meeting them by chance. Fanny wasn't very pleased to see Henry, but her mother was delighted. "How nice to see you again, Mr. Crawford," she said. "Would you like to walk with us?" As this was exactly what Henry had intended, he smiled and accepted the offer. He started talking to Fanny immediately. "When you decide to return to Mansfield Park, I would be happy to accompany you," he said. "You must write and tell me when you are ready to leave Portsmouth, and I will come immediately with my carriage." Fanny said nothing. Young ladies didn't travel alone, and she knew that someone would have to come and take her to Mansfield Park. But she couldn't think of a good excuse to refuse his offer. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. "Can I bring you anything from London? Would you like me to send you some books? I'd be happy to bring them for you." He was very disappointed when Fanny thanked him politely, but said there was nothing at all that she needed. He had come to Portsmouth to try and persuade Fanny to change her mind and marry him. He had done everything possible to make a good impression on Fanny, and now he waited for some sign that she was ready to love him. He returned to London very disappointed that his efforts had not succeeded. Chapter 14. Letters. In London, Henry told his sister all about his visit to Portsmouth. Mary saw how unhappy her brother was, and she was angry with Fanny. "Henry loves Fanny so much. Why can't she love him in return?" she said to herself. "I must try to help my brother. I'll make Fanny believe that Henry still loves Maria Rushworth. Fanny will be jealous, and then she'll realize that she wants Henry for herself." Mary didn't want Fanny to guess that it was a trick, so she was very careful. She wrote to Fanny and said just enough in her letter to make Fanny suspect a relationship between Maria and Henry. Mary started her letter to Fanny with a long description of life in London. She told Fanny all about the parties and balls she had been to, and the appearance and behavior of the people she had met. She wrote that Edmund had visited her several times, but she said nothing that made the visits sound special in any way. Finally, at the end of the letter, she mentioned Henry briefly. "I'm planning to have a big party," she wrote. "I've invited a lot of people, including the Rushworths. Obviously, Henry will be there. I think he would like to see Maria again, though he doesn't say so. He can't have forgotten so quickly how he once felt about her." Mary's letter to Fanny did not have the effect that Mary had hoped for. It didn't make Fanny jealous, because she wasn't interested in Henry. But she understood perfectly what Mary was trying to do, and it only made her opinion of Mary Crawford worse. "Mary wants me to think that Henry is going to her party to see my cousin Maria Rushworth, so that I will be jealous. But Mary is mistaken," she thought. "And it's unkind of Mary to invite the Rushworths when Henry will be there. It will be very uncomfortable for both the Rushworths and Henry." After that, Fanny didn't spend any more time thinking about Henry Crawford. The only parts of the letter she was really interested in were those about Edmund. She was upset to read that Edmund had visited Mary several times, but she comforted herself with the thought that Mary had written nothing about a proposal of marriage from Edmund. "Mary is never serious about anything important," Fanny thought. "She's only interested in appearances and in talking about the private lives of everyone she meets. One day Edmund will realize how unsuitable she is to be his wife." But although Fanny tried hard to persuade herself that that would happen, she couldn't be sure. For days after receiving Mary's letter, Fanny was miserable, but she wasn't used to thinking only of herself. "This isn't right," she thought. "I'm being very selfish. I've been neglecting poor Susan, and she needs me." Susan was delighted that Fanny wanted to spend time with her once again, and the two girls found many things to talk about. Sometimes they discussed interesting things Fanny had read about, or they spoke of William and the other two brothers who no longer lived at home. They often spoke of Fanny's life at Mansfield Park. Fanny was always ready to talk about it, and Susan was happy to listen. It worried Fanny that Susan would be lonely and unhappy when she went back to Mansfield Park, but she didn't know what she could do about it. The days passed slowly, and no more letters came for Fanny. Eventually, however, a letter arrived from Edmund, who had left London and returned to Mansfield Park. She saw immediately that it was a very long letter and was afraid. "Edmund doesn't usually write such long letters," she thought. "I don't think I can bear it if it's a letter telling me how wonderful Mary Crawford is." As Fanny had feared, the letter was mostly about Mary Crawford. Although it contained quite a lot of criticism of Mary, it was clear that Edmund was still in love with her. He still found excuses for all of Mary's weaknesses. Edmund had been at Mary's party, and he made an effort to give Fanny news of the relatives and friends he had met there. "The Rushworths don't look unhappy," he wrote. "I recently heard a scandalous rumor that Henry Crawford still loves my sister Maria, but I'm happy to say that I saw no sign of it. Henry still talks only of his love for you, Fanny." The rest of the letter was news of Mansfield Park, which Fanny usually enjoyed reading. This time, however, she was so unhappy that she could hardly concentrate on the words. And there was another piece of news in the letter that upset Fanny. "I miss you, and wish you were here," Edmund wrote. "I want so much to talk to you, but I'm afraid we won't see each other for several more weeks. My father will be in London on business in a few weeks' time, and afterwards we'll travel from London to Portsmouth to get you and bring you back to Mansfield Park." "I never want to get another letter in my life," poor Fanny thought. "They only bring me unhappiness." Chapter 15. Bad News. For several days, Fanny heard nothing until one day a letter arrived from Lady Bertram. It contained some upsetting news. Tom Bertram had gone to stay with some friends and had had an accident. He'd fallen from his horse while riding. His injuries weren't very serious, but they had been neglected and had become infected. As a result, Tom was now extremely ill, and Edmund had gone to bring him home to Mansfield Park. "Poor Tom! I hope he recovers soon," thought Fanny. "How worried Edmund and my aunt and uncle must be. I wish there was something I could do to help." But Tom did not recover quickly. His condition got worse, and the doctors feared for his life. Edmund stayed at Tom's side all the time, and their father visited the sick room frequently. Lady Bertram never spent more than a moment or two there because she couldn't bear to see Tom's thin, pale face. She consoled herself by writing long letters to Fanny. She filled the pages with descriptions of her own suffering, but never mentioned Tom's injuries. "It's a terrible thing to see my son so ill," she wrote to Fanny. "I wish you were here to console me. It's very hard for me that you are away from home at this time." Fanny sighed. She realized that she wouldn't learn any more about Tom's situation from her aunt, and was very grateful when one day she received a letter from Edmund. "I know how much you must want news," Edmund wrote to Fanny, "but I'm sorry that I've got nothing good to tell you. We're very worried about Tom. He's not getting better as quickly as he should, and he's very weak and depressed." Fanny was very upset. It was true that she didn't like her cousin Tom much, and found him thoughtless and irresponsible. He liked to enjoy himself, and often went to stay with friends when he should have been helping his father. Nevertheless, the possibility that Tom might die or be an invalid all his life was shocking. Fanny had very little else to occupy her time, and so spent hours worrying and thinking about Tom, Mansfield Park, and her family in Portsmouth. "In all the years I was at Mansfield Park, I always believed that Portsmouth was my real home," she thought. "But I don't feel part of my own family. I don't know where I belong now." There was one person, however, who had no doubts about where Fanny belonged, and that was Lady Bertram. In every letter that she sent to her niece, Lady Bertram wrote how sorry she was that Fanny wasn't there with her, or how much she wanted Fanny to come home to Mansfield Park. "My aunt writes to me so often, and in such a warm way that I don't feel like a poor cousin anymore," Fanny thought. "My aunt is right. Mansfield Park is my home now." Something that surprised Fanny was that her aunt's letters did not mention Julia or Maria visiting Mansfield Park. "How strange that Julia and Maria haven't gone to see their brother when he is so ill," thought Fanny. "My aunt tells me Julia has accepted an invitation to stay for a few weeks with cousins of her father, but surely it's more important for her to be with her mother. And Mr. Rushworth would certainly have agreed if Maria had wanted to visit her family at this time. It's strange that my aunt doesn't ask either Maria or Julia to come and be with her. She seems to need me more than she needs her daughters. Chapter 16. A Scandal. While Fanny was thinking about Tom Bertram and his family, someone else was also thinking about Tom. Mary Crawford was still in London, but she'd heard about Tom's illness from her brother Henry. "I don't want Tom to die," Mary said to herself. "I'd never wish for such a terrible thing. But if Tom dies, Edmund will be the only son. One day he'll inherit his father's wealth and position and become Sir Edmund. If I marry him, I'll be Lady Bertram. I'd like that." Mary didn't want Henry to know what she was thinking, so she started to talk about Fanny. She knew that Henry was always happy to talk about her. "I've got an idea," she said to Henry. "I'm going to write a letter to Fanny. Why don't I send her a message from you?" "I'd like that," answered Henry. "What do you think I should say?" "This would be the perfect time to remind Fanny of your offer to drive her to Mansfield Park in your carriage. She wants so much to get back there that I think she'll accept. Should I write that?" "That's an excellent idea," said Henry happily. "Tell her I'll come as soon as she wants." When Mary's letter arrived, Fanny read it quickly, but read more carefully when she got to the part about Henry. "As you know, Henry met your cousin Maria Rushworth while he was staying with friends in Richmond, but please don't think he went there especially to see Maria. Henry goes to Richmond every year. Maria told my brother some shocking news. It seems that her brother Tom is dangerously ill and may not recover. How terrible! I am so worried. Please write and give me more details. You must want to come back to Mansfield Park at a time like this. Henry says he'll be happy to drive you back whenever you want." The letter annoyed Fanny, but she wasn't deceived by what she read. "Stupid girl," she said to herself. "She's trying once again to make me suspect a relationship between Maria and Henry. She wants me to be jealous. And she pretends to care about poor Tom, but it's a lie. I don't think she'd be at all sorry if Tom died." Mary had been right about Fanny's wish to get back to Mansfield Park, but she was wrong in thinking that Fanny would accept Henry's offer. She decided to write Mary a letter. "Thank you for your kind offer," Fanny wrote, "but I must refuse. My uncle will come for me when he wants me at Mansfield Park. Until then, I must stay in Portsmouth." In reply to Mary's questions about Tom Bertram's health, Fanny wrote the truth, that she knew very little except that he was still extremely ill. A few days later, another letter arrived from Mary. Fanny opened it with a sigh, expecting to read how disappointed Mary and Henry were that she hadn't accepted Henry's offer. Instead, the letter contained something much more worrying. "Pay no attention to any rumors you hear," were Mary's first words. "It's probably all a mistake. You can be sure that Henry hasn't done anything wrong. I expect he and Maria have gone off with Julia." Fanny was used to Mary's habit of insinuating something without expressing it clearly. Usually it just irritated her, but this time she was upset. Obviously, something very bad had happened. "It's to do with the Rushworths and Henry," said Fanny to herself. "What has happened? Why doesn't Mary tell me clearly? I hope she'll write again soon and tell me more." But the days passed, and Fanny heard nothing. When she finally got news, it came in a very surprising manner. "What's the name of that gentleman your cousin Maria Bertram married?" Mr. Price asked Fanny one evening as he was reading the newspaper. "Rushworth, father," answered Fanny. "That's what I thought. Well, it seems that your rich cousin, Maria Rushworth, is involved in a scandal," said her father. "It says here in the paper that she's left her husband and run off with another man. The paper calls him Mr. C. If she were my daughter, I'd punish her very severely and make her go back to her husband." "It can't be true. It must be a terrible mistake," cried Fanny, very upset. But in her heart, she knew it was true. That night, Fanny couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and thought about everything that had happened since Henry Crawford came to Mansfield Park. "Am I partly responsible for this scandal?" she wondered. "If I had agreed to marry Henry, would he have forgotten my cousin Maria?" Poor Fanny. She felt guilty and unhappy, but she also thought that Maria's behavior was immoral, and she was angry that Maria's selfishness was causing the Bertrams such unhappiness. She wondered how her cousin Maria could be happy when she was causing misery to so many other people. Chapter 17. Changes. The truth was that Maria wasn't happy. She knew now that she had made many mistakes, the first of which had been her marriage to Rushworth. "I wish I'd never married Mr. Rushworth," she had said to herself quite soon after the wedding. "He's so boring, and all his wealth doesn't make me happy." Then one evening, Maria met Henry Crawford at a party, and she knew at once that she was still in love with him. She decided to leave her husband, and she persuaded Henry to run away with her. It was only later that she discovered that Henry wasn't as serious about the relationship as she was. Henry wasn't in love with Maria. She was attractive and charming and fun to be with, and moreover, being with Maria helped him to forget Fanny and her refusal to marry him. Stupidly, Henry agreed to Maria's plan. For a short while, Maria and Henry were happy together, but it wasn't long before Henry regretted what he'd done. "We've had a good time together, Maria," he said to her one day, "but I don't want to marry you. I hope we'll stay good friends." When Henry left her, Maria was shocked. It was difficult for her to accept that Henry didn't want to marry her. "What's going to happen to me now?" she thought. "I've lost the only man I love. My reputation is ruined forever, and I'm not welcome in good London society anymore. I don't have any money or a home of my own. I can't go back to Mr. Rushworth after what I've done, and anyway, his mother has persuaded him to divorce me. She never liked me, and now she sees an opportunity to get rid of me." For some time, Maria wondered what she should do. Finally, she made her decision. "I'll have to write to my father and ask him for help, but he's so old-fashioned," she thought miserably. "He doesn't approve of divorce, and he won't let me mix in society. There will be no more balls and parties, and life will be very boring." A few days later, Sir Thomas received Maria's letter. "Maria has behaved badly, but she's still my daughter," he said when he'd read the letter. "I must go to London at once and bring her here. Edmund will come with me." "How wonderful it will be to have dear Maria with us at Mansfield Park again," said Mrs. Norris, trying to be cheerful. Since the news of Maria running away with Henry Crawford had reached Mansfield Park, Mrs. Norris had become a different person. All her confidence had disappeared, and she was very unhappy. She was the person who had introduced Maria to Mr. Rushworth and who had encouraged the marriage, but everything had turned out badly. She was shocked to hear what Sir Thomas said next. "My dear Mrs. Norris," he said firmly, "I'll support Maria and buy a home for her. That's my duty as a father. But after the scandalous way she's behaved, I won't let her live with us at Mansfield Park. She will only stay here for as long as I need to buy a small house for her in another part of the country. I'll make sure that she has everything she needs to live in reasonable comfort, but that is all. What will I do now? Mrs. Norris wondered. Nobody needs me. Maria won't be at Mansfield Park. Julia doesn't seem to be interested in my advice anymore, and she spends so much time staying with friends that she's hardly here. My sister won't let me console her over Maria because she's waiting for Fanny to come back to Mansfield Park. I really don't understand why she'd prefer to have a poor niece console her rather than her own sister. Mrs. Norris turned to Sir Thomas in desperation. Sir Thomas, she said, you know how I love to be useful. Is there any way that I can help you? Yes, there certainly is, answered Sir Thomas. Maria won't be able to live alone. She'll need a companion. I'll arrange for you to join her when she moves to her new home. Mrs. Norris didn't say anything. She didn't want to leave the luxury of Mansfield Park and move to a small house far away, but she couldn't refuse. Sir Thomas was satisfied with his decision. It would solve the problem of a companion for Maria, and at the same time, it would remove Mrs. Norris from Mansfield Park. She irritated everyone, and no one would be sorry when she left. I was wrong about Mrs. Norris, Sir Thomas said to himself. I shouldn't have encouraged her to spend so much time with us. I had no idea until it was too late that she was a bad influence on my daughters. Instead of being firm and teaching them good moral behavior, she kept telling them how clever and beautiful they were. She spoiled them. Chapter 18. An Invitation. Sir Thomas's thoughts turned to his sons. He was delighted to see that Tom was now recovering slowly from his illness, but upset to see that Edmund seemed unhappy. He didn't know exactly what had happened between Edmund and Mary, but he could see that his son was miserable. Edmund had always been Sir Thomas's favorite. He helped his father when Tom should have done so and didn't complain, and he was always kind and considerate. During the time of Tom's illness, Edmund had been very busy looking after his brother and hadn't been able to help his father. Preoccupied with his business affairs and his worries about his children, Sir Thomas hadn't had time to go to Portsmouth and bring Fanny home when planned. But he often thought about his niece and realized that he missed her. Like Edmund, she was always kind and considerate, always ready to listen and to help. Sir Thomas, Lady Bertram said one day, Fanny has been away too long. It's time she came back to Mansfield Park. We'll all be happy when she's here with us again. You're right, my dear, answered her husband. I never realized all those years ago, when we invited Fanny to live at Mansfield Park, how dear she would become to us. She should be here with us now. But I don't like to leave you, my dear, when you are so worried about Maria. Why don't you send Edmund to get Fanny? Asked Lady Bertram. Tom's feeling well enough now to manage without his brother for a few days. That's an excellent idea, said her husband. Edmund must write today and tell Fanny that he's coming to bring her home. She'll only need a day to pack, so Edmund can leave very soon. It gave Sir Thomas great pleasure to think that Fanny would soon be back at Mansfield Park, and it occurred to him that there might be something more he could do for Fanny and her family. Tell me, my dear, he said to his wife, what do you think of inviting Susan to come and live at Mansfield Park also? It would be very nice for Fanny to have her sister here. Fanny wrote in her letters that they're very close now. Lady Bertram was so happy at the possibility of having her dear Fanny with her very soon that she was prepared to agree to anything her husband suggested. "How good and kind you are," she said with a smile. "I'll be very happy if Susan comes to live with us." 2 days later, Edmund's letter arrived in Portsmouth, and with it the invitation for Susan, and the news that he would be in Portsmouth the following morning. Both girls were delighted. Fanny was excited at the thought of going home, and very grateful to her uncle. "What a good man my uncle is," she thought. "He has so many problems at the moment, but he's still got time to think about my family. And I don't have to worry about leaving Susan. She'll be coming to Mansfield Park with me." As for Susan, she couldn't believe her good fortune. "How wonderful!" she cried. "You've told me so much about Mansfield Park, Fanny. I know I'll be very happy there." Edmund arrived early the next morning. When Fanny saw him, her feelings were almost too much for her. She loved him so much, and couldn't bear to see how unhappy he looked. Edmund was very pleased to see Fanny, and put his arms around her, calling her "my only sister, my only comfort." "Oh, Edmund, Edmund," thought Fanny, "how happy I am to be in your arms. I know that you love me dearly, but I don't want you to love me as a sister. Will you never love me any other way?" Chapter 19. Back to Mansfield Park. Mrs. Price wished Edmund a safe journey and said goodbye tearfully to her daughters. But then she hurried back into the house, and soon was too busy to think about them any more. The carriage left, and soon the city of Portsmouth was far behind them. Susan didn't talk much, but looked out of the carriage window. She had never been out of Portsmouth before, and everything was different and exciting. Her head was filled with thoughts of the new life waiting for her at Mansfield Park. Fanny had so many questions to ask Edmund that she hardly knew where to start. "How is Tom? And how are my aunt and uncle?" she wanted to know. "What news is there of Maria?" "Tom is much better, and getting stronger every day," Edmund replied. "My parents are well, and look forward to seeing you. You'll be a great comfort to them both. My father and I are going to London soon to bring Maria back to Mansfield Park, but only for a short time. She and my Aunt Norris are going to live in another part of the country." "My aunt wrote that Julia was staying with relatives. Is she coming home soon, too?" Fanny asked. "I think so," answered Edmund. "But I must tell you something interesting that Julia wrote in a letter to Tom. Do you remember Tom's friend Yates, who stayed with us several months ago? The cousins that Julia's staying with had a dinner party, and Yates was one of the guests. He and Julia were very surprised to see each other. They've met a few times since then, and Yates always asks about our family and sends us kind messages." Edmund and Fanny spoke of many things, but they didn't talk about Mary Crawford at all. Fanny wasn't sorry. She didn't want to hear how wonderful Mary was. Edmund would have liked to tell Fanny that he'd almost decided not to marry Mary, and was very unhappy about this, but with Susan in the carriage, he couldn't talk frankly. After a while, they sat quietly and didn't talk much for the rest of the journey. The carriage arrived at Mansfield Park, and Lady Bertram came running out of the house. "Oh, Fanny!" she cried, taking her niece in her arms. "How wonderful to see you! Now I'll be happy again." Sir Thomas and Tom greeted Fanny warmly, and even the servants seemed pleased to see her. Fanny felt that she really had come home. Susan, too, was received in a very friendly way, but the magnificence of Mansfield Park made her timid, and all she could do was thank her uncle very politely for his kindness. Nothing could spoil Fanny's happiness at that moment, not even the angry looks that Mrs. Norris was giving Fanny and Susan. Mrs. Norris couldn't understand how everyone was so delighted to see the two poor nieces that she herself considered quite unimportant. 2 days after her return, Sir Thomas and Edmund left for London to go and get Maria. Fanny spent almost all her time with her Aunt Bertram, listening patiently to her problems and sympathizing with her suffering. As she listened, she was able to fill in many of the missing details in the information she'd had about Maria. From her aunt, she learned that the problems with Maria had started when she went to stay with some new friends near London. Neither Julia nor Mr. Rushworth had accompanied her because Mr. Rushworth had gone to visit his mother, and Julia was staying with relatives at the time. By chance, Henry Crawford was staying in the same area as Maria, and since he was an old friend of the Bertram family, he often came to visit her. "That was the correct thing to do," said Lady Bertram. "It would have been impolite for Henry Crawford not to visit an old friend like Maria when she was staying in the very same neighborhood. Who would ever have imagined what problems it would cause?" Shortly after Sir Thomas and Edmund left, another piece of bad news reached the family. Julia had eloped with Yates. Yates had loved Julia for a long time, but to Julia, Yates was just a friend. He was pleasant enough, but he was a weak young man, and had made a bad impression on Sir Thomas when he had introduced the home theatricals to Mansfield Park. Now, however, Julia saw Yates as a way of escape. "Life at Mansfield Park is so boring," she said to herself. "And after the way Maria has behaved, my father will be stricter than ever. He'll probably never allow me to come to London again. I'd rather be married, even if I don't love the person. I'll marry Yates. The family will disapprove, but I won't let them stop me." Julia made a great effort to be warm and charming to Yates, and he was easily convinced that she was ready to return his love. He was delighted. "Julia, my darling," he said one day, "will you marry me?" "Of course," Julia answered with a smile. "But my family is too busy with Maria's problems at the moment to think of making a big wedding. Why don't we elope and get married quietly?" When news of Julia's marriage reached Mansfield Park, the family was shocked. After some time, however, they agreed that although she'd behaved stupidly and had made a poor choice of a husband, Julia had done nothing immoral or disgraceful like Maria. Sir Thomas would have liked to get some help with his worries about his daughters by talking to Edmund, but he knew that his younger son had problems of his own. On the journey home from London, he looked at Edmund and felt sorry for him. "My poor Edmund," Sir Thomas thought. "How sad he looks. He knows he can't marry Mary Crawford now, even if he still loves her. As a future clergyman and a member of this family, he can never be connected in any way to Henry Crawford's family. I hope that one day he'll find someone else to love." Back at Mansfield Park, Edmund confided his problems to his dear friend Fanny. He told her how shocked he'd been that instead of condemning Maria and Henry's behavior, Mary hadn't taken it seriously at all. When Edmund said the two young people had behaved very badly, Mary had just laughed and said that he was already talking like a clergyman. "My heart is broken," Edmund told Fanny. "I can never marry Mary, but I'll never forget her. Oh, Fanny, your friendship is the only comfort I've got now." Fanny spoke gently and kindly to Edmund, but she was careful to hide what she was really thinking. "I'm happy that you need me, my dear Edmund," thought Fanny, "but you're wrong about Mary. One day you'll forget all about her. Now that you're sure you'll never marry her, the first step has been taken." The only person who was quite unaffected by all that was happening was Susan. She didn't know any of the Bertrams well enough to share their feelings. She had no idea how much Fanny loved Edmund, but it was enough for her to know that her sister no longer looked so unhappy. Everyone was very friendly, and Susan was enjoying herself getting to know Mansfield Park. "Fanny," Susan said to her sister one day, "I think our Aunt Bertram likes me. She's always very kind to me. Do you think she would like me to read aloud to her as you often do?" "She'll be pleased that you want to be useful," answered Fanny. "I think she'll agree." Chapter 20. A Happy Ending. Maria returned to Mansfield Park with Sir Thomas and Edmund, but she left shortly afterwards for her new home, and Mrs. Norris went with her. Tom continued to get stronger. His long illness had changed him. It had given him the opportunity to think about his life, and he decided to become more serious and responsible. Julia wrote to her family saying that she was sorry she had behaved foolishly, and begged them for their forgiveness. Her parents believed she was sincere and forgave her immediately. They were optimistic that the marriage would be a happy one. "Since Julia is already married, I think it would be best to welcome Yates into the family," said Sir Thomas. "He's a weak character, but I'm sure he'll improve. He loves Julia very much, and she'll be a good influence on him." Another change took place in the neighborhood. The Grants left and went to live in London. They would have preferred to stay where they were, but their connection with the Crawfords made living near the Bertram family very uncomfortable. Sir Thomas thought about his family and sighed. He'd made so many mistakes when his children were growing up, although at the time he'd believed he was doing the right thing. "How wrong I was to be strict with my daughters instead of trying to understand their lively personalities. How stupid I was to place such importance on wealthy families and connections. What's important is good character and good principles. Fanny and Edmund have both of those. I hope that one day they'll find the happiness they deserve." Edmund shared his father's opinion of Fanny. "Fanny is so good and kind," he thought, looking at Fanny affectionately. "She's got all the qualities a man looks for in a wife. She'll make some lucky man very happy one day." But suddenly, another thought occurred to Edmund. "I don't want Fanny to be happy with another man. I want her to be happy with me. I love her." He looked at Fanny and smiled. At that moment, Fanny raised her eyes and saw the look she had waited for so long and so patiently. Edmund took her in his arms and asked her to be his wife. "My dearest Edmund," she said with tears of happiness in her eyes, "there is nothing I want more in the whole world than to be your wife." Soon afterwards, Edmund and Fanny were married. Everyone was delighted and agreed that they were perfect for each other. When the Grants moved to London, Edmund became the clergyman in the area, and the young couple went to live in the Grants' former home, which was near enough for them to visit the family at Mansfield Park often. After they left, Lady Bertram worried that she would miss Fanny and have no one to read to her or talk to her when her husband was busy. But Susan soon took Fanny's place as Lady Bertram's companion. She was a clever girl and quickly learned how to please her aunt, and they were both perfectly satisfied with the new arrangement. Sir Thomas liked nothing better than to go and visit Fanny and Edmund. Their obvious happiness brought great joy to him and to all those who loved them. Peace and contentment returned to Mansfield Park once again.